In this paper, we collaborate with a feminist makerspace to engage creative small business owners in 2 design workshops. In doing so, we uncovered the unique challenges participants face when attempting to ask for feedback on creative work through social media platforms. We then provide practical and conceptual considerations for supporting a wide range of online feedback-seeking practices. I'll take a quick moment to describe the images on this slide, and I'll continue to do this throughout the talk. From left to right, the first of 3 photos is one of the design workshops, where there are about a dozen small business owners seated around high-top tables. The second photo is also of the feminist makerspace we collaborated with. However, this is showcasing one of their educational workshops. There are tools around the perimeter of the room with several individuals circled around a 3D printer. Finally, the third photo is of the feminist makerspace during a co-working session where 3 individuals sit at their own desks quietly working away. This paper's motivation started with our initial observations in our preliminary work of the prominence of feedback seeking on social media platforms by creative small business owners. To showcase a few examples, here is one small business owner on the left who is seeking feedback on how to finish her scarf, where she is modeling 2 different options for her followers to vote on. And on the right is another small business owner who is asking her social media audience which background they prefer on one of her newly commissioned portrait designs, where one option includes circles in the backdrop and the other does not. In both examples, these participants are offering 2 alternatives of their artifact side by side, soliciting feedback through comparison. In our preliminary observations, feedback seeking on social media platforms took many shapes. So for instance, on the left, we have someone asking for feedback on a design sketch where they have attached a PDF of that sketch and listed the specific requests for the types of feedback they desire. In the middle, there's someone asking for feedback on a paper prototype. And finally, on the right, this is a participant who is asking for feedback on a product that is almost completed. And while online feedback exchange is well studied and detailed by the human-computer interaction and CSCW literature, prior work has overlooked the role that social media platforms play in this online feedback ecosystem. But social media platforms are a critical part of the online feedback ecosystem, and the COVID-19 pandemic cemented the importance of social media platforms for successful small business ownership to connect and engage with their customers remotely. This paper builds upon Fung et al.'s work on online feedback exchange, where they present a framework with 5 key steps which comprise a successful online feedback exchange, starting with an individual's decision, in this case a creative small business owner, to seek feedback. Step 2, acting on that decision. Step 3, providing incentives for potential feedback providers to respond to the request for feedback. Step 4, ensuring said feedback is adapted to the request and is of high quality. And finally, step 5, having the individual effectively internalize and integrate the feedback they've received. Fung et al. Argue that the initial 2 steps in online feedback exchange are overshadowed in the literature by the following steps, and therefore in this paper we focus on feedback seeking in order to address this gap. To quickly review, there are many benefits of seeking feedback on creative work. Feedback can increase iteration, which ultimately improves the quality of the product. Feedback can make salient differences between intended and actual interpretation of an artifact and increase awareness of cognitive fixation. Finally, feedback encourages reflection, which can increase self-efficacy over time by fostering a growth mindset. Therefore, our research questions in this paper include: first, what practices do creative small business owners develop in seeking feedback on their work through social media? And second, what conceptual, technological, and emotional challenges do they face when seeking feedback on creative work through social media? 26 small business owners participated in this study, 21 of whom were women, 2 men, 2 gender fluid, and 1 non-binary individual. The median age was 35. The types of creative work included fiber arts, pet supplies, food and drink, jewelry, homewares, and filmmaking, to name a few. And the social media platforms included Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and WhatsApp. Our analyses resulted in 3 key challenges. First, large-scale feeds and diverse audiences were not necessarily accessible to participants. As Natalie, a fiber artist, describes, I was a member of a really big crafting group, but I left it because it was too big to be helpful. It was meant to connect sellers to buyers, but it was mainly just sellers posting their items. Some of them did get feedback, but most of them did not get any views. Specifically, participants noted the lack of control over the visibility of their feedback requests when asking for feedback in large-scale feeds, in part because of the algorithmic ranking of posts. For example, Sierra, a maker of accessories, commented on the unreliable timing of responses, as feedback requests may only be seen days after posting due to algorithmic ranking. In addition to large-scale feeds, the large amount of diversity of audiences, for instance, family, friends, peers, customers, admirers, competitors, all of which comprised the social media feedback audiences, often resulted in a loss of critical context or context collapse when small business owners attempted to ask for feedback. For example, Tia, a poet, is followed by many of their family members on social media, in addition to those, of course, who are interested in their spoken word and poetry work. They shared with us, my family doesn't understand it. They ask, so what exactly are you doing? I think that's why I don't get a lot of feedback on social media. They don't really know what's going on. The second challenge participants described to us was a lack of comfort sharing unpolished work. If we return to the example shared earlier, we can see 3 distinct levels of fidelity of the artifact included in the feedback solicitation, and we found that participants were less willing to ask for feedback early on in their creative process, even though related work posits that such requests would result in the most effective feedback if they were earlier on in their design process. Andrea, a filmmaker, shares their fears when asking for in-progress work on social media. My fear is being written off immediately. There's a lot of judgment and competitions. I worry what people will say. That's what you're asking for? You don't know what you're doing. And then I'm on the bad idiots list. Sharing unpolished work was associated with a reputational cost, as described in the example by Andrea. And participants also had intellectual property concerns when sharing unfinished work, as unfortunately there was a common precedence for having early stage ideas stolen and produced elsewhere, such as by a large corporation. To combat these issues, 22 of 26 participants found or curated small exclusive groups on social media platforms in order to facilitate control, trust, and context. Kim, a maker of handbags and accessories, for instance, shared, "It's never too early to ask for feedback from your trusted sources. I have a group of WhatsApp with my friends. We've been friends for 10 to 15 years. I'm just like, steal my stuff," end quote. And I just throw stuff out at them, and I'm like, quote, "What do you think of this?" end quote. Finally, the last core challenge of small business owners for seeking feedback on social media is related to the blurring and tight coupling of participants' personal and business identities. This coupling was often so tight that participants referred to themselves as a business. For instance, Mia, a small business owner who creates jewelry and beauty products, shared, "I run a business, but then myself, I'm also a business." The lack of boundaries led to unwanted exposure, discouragement, and the need to self-regulate participants' emotions in order to continue in their creative process. Lisa articulates, "It's a really dynamic process on social media when you're in the process of making. To allow people to be in that process with you, it takes bravery. Our findings suggest that much of feedback-related data is not public, and so alternative methods may be required to unearth ongoing challenges to the success of feedback exchange on social media. We argue that there is a need to move beyond interrogating static categories of relationships between feedback requesters and providers common in prior work, and instead examine the nature and quality of relationships between feedback requester and provider. Finally, our work suggests the need to acknowledge the additional labors of seeking feedback on social media, given the tight coupling between the self and the business. Thank you for your time and attention. We hope that you are able to check out our paper in full.